Hey, how you doing? It's Clayton here from howtodrawcomics.net and welcome to today's comic art demonstration. In this video, we are going to be taking a look at the process behind a cover commission I did for a title called The Embrace. Joining me today in the studio, we've got Korey Barton, the other half of Barton Bros Studio. How you doing today, Korey?
Yeah, dude, I'm doing great, man. I'm definitely happy to be here on another video with you. And, I'm pretty excited to see how you actually done this piece, because I ended up doing the colors for it. So I'm quite interested to see your process, man.
Thank you. Yeah, this was an interesting work to create because it was during a time that was somewhat unprecedented for me when I really started to speed up my workflow for comic book illustration. And that was really important to me because up until recently, it had taken me an extremely long amount of time to finish a single piece of work, which was just downright discouraging, unproductive, and really didn't give me the freedom to take on a huge workload. So I was having to knock back lots of requests for commissions. I was only able to push out 1 or 2 pages per week on our comic book project, Kozor, Descent into Madness, which, by the way, if you're listening, you can check out via the link in the description below. It's a comic book project that both Korey and I are working on, a true Barton Bros collaboration. And if you like dark fantasy franchises such as Berserk, The Witcher, Dark Souls, it's going to be right up your alley. The intense artwork of Korey, highly detailed, highly intricate. Combine that with the workovers I've done over the top and then the remastered colors. What you get is one of the best presentations that you could possibly hope for a comic book. Anyway, back to what we're looking at here.
Yeah.
What exactly is this phase of the cover illustration process?
Yeah, man, it's quite different to the end result. So, what were you thinking about here?
It's very different. What I'll often do for my clients, just so that I have some ideas to the direction they would like me to go in, because in the beginning, anything goes. A lot of the time, the client knows what they don't want, but they don't necessarily know what they want. And so it's my job as the illustrator to kind of figure that out, to help guide them through the various possibilities that we could ultimately solidify and turn into the finished cover. Yeah, and so absolutely. What you just saw me doing was a variety of different thumbnail sketches. Now, these are very small, rough drafts that really aren't refined or polished in any capacity, but serve to promote a concept or an idea that we might possibly be able to invest more energy into later on down the track and see as the ultimate cover.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, in the end, Michael Oden, who was the man who commissioned me to do this cover, he decided for the close-up portrait shot of the Embrace, which I personally felt was the idea which worked best as well, because it just had so much impact. It was really in your face. You could just imagine that if it was sitting on the shelf in a comic book store, it'd capture your attention straight away. You'd see it out the corner of your eye, and you'd just be compelled to pick it up, open that cover, and see what was awaiting for you inside. And that was the real aim that I was striving for here as I was creating this piece.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to make sure that it was captivating, which any good cover should be when it comes to creating either a commission for somebody else or doing your own comic book cover. It's there to sell the product. It's really a promotional advertisement. And you got to make sure that you're doing everything within your power to get people excited, get them anticipating what's going to be involved with the story when they decide to open it up and begin reading. Because, if you're going to sell them with that cover, You got to make sure that the story is great, but it doesn't matter how great that story is if you're not able to sell them on the cover in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're just not going to be bothered to open it up, especially in this day and age when you've got so many things begging for your attention. Video games, Netflix.
Yeah, man. Well, yeah, so I am wondering, like, what was the type of, like, description Oden actually gave you? Did he give you any information at all, or did he just say he wanted the character drawn?
He did give me some information. He gave me an overall general plot for what the book was about. And it involved a father whose son had died and kind of, I guess, somehow rose from the dead in some spiritual, celestial form, and merged with the dad, forming this superhero symbiote suit of some kind, not unlike Spawn, not unlike Haunt. And I guess that's where the story begins. He starts to endeavor out on a quest to try and figure out who it was that murdered his son, why his son died. At least, look, that's me sub-quoting what was told off of the top of my head.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And just about, like, these lines, man, I've noticed you're really great at doing nicely shaped simple lines. Like, how do you get that sort of like a triangular almost shape while keeping it very neat?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. It's all to do with pen pressure. So whether or not I'm pulling a line away from me or I'm pulling it toward me, it's going to start thick or thin at one end and end up in the opposite state by the time I reach the end of that line. Okay, so if I'm going from thick, I'm going to thin. If I'm going from thin, I'm going to thick. And what that does is it creates this variation within the thickness of the line's trajectory. And this is something you want because it just tends to make the line appear more alive. It's got a certain amount of dynamicness applied to it now, which is just more interesting to look at, more lively than if you had a contour that was a consistent thickness all the way through.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've even noticed your brush size is like 500 right now, which is pretty crazy. I usually keep to like 15.
Yeah. Now, here's the thing that I will say on that. Your brush size, it's going to depend on, one, how big the canvas is that you're working on top of, and this is actually a very, very big canvas. I think it's over 10,000 pixels, either lengthwise or wide. Either way, it is a very large canvas. So Oden could take this beautiful illustration that I've done for him, this cover, and he could actually make it into a poster, which was of a significant size if he was so inclined. But besides that, your canvas is going to cause you to shift your brush size up and down. So I wouldn't be using a brush size of 500, 300 if I was working on a canvas that had a lower resolution, for example. Same with the zoom, right? I found that my zoom is going to be completely shifted and changed up in terms of the percent to which I'm working in terms of distance, and it's dependent once more on the canvas size, on the resolution of the image that I'm working in. And so those things should be considered, and it makes it difficult for me to say, oh, you should be using this particular brush size, or you should be using this particular level of zoom, because again, it's all dependent on the size of the canvas that you're working on. So it's something to keep in mind. I couldn't tell you the exact dimensions. It's in the range. Oh, actually, it's got it right here up at the top here. So it looks like it's 10 by 15 inches, 600 dpi. There you go. So that is the brush size I would use, and the amount of zoom I'm at that particular resolution.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one thing I worry about all the time. Are my lines too small for print? How do you get past that? Because, I mean, if you're using different shaped brushes, it's like you want that sort of consistency, especially throughout a comic. And you got to think about how it's going to print. So what's your sort of ideas on that?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's something I contemplate myself a lot, because you don't want to be sitting there for hours and hours on end, throwing down hatch after hatch, detail after detail, only for it to be printed and to have all that detail bleed together into one blurry mess. That's definitely something that you want to avoid. So the way in which I attempt to avoid it as much as possible is I'll hold up an actual comic book to my screen, and I'll zoom into that amount to make it so that I'm working at a distance which is showing the canvas to be just a little bit larger than the actual size of that comic book that I'm holding up to the screen as a comparison.
Yeah.
And that works fairly well for me, but also I'll look at other comic book covers that some of my favorite artists have done.
Yeah,
we know
absolutely.
who they are: Mark Silvestri, Todd McFarlane, Michael Turner, etc. And I'll try to observe, in comparison to the size of that cover, how large is their line work? How much detail have they incorporated into the piece? And you'll be surprised at the level of intricacy sometimes that they can fit in there and still have it print fairly clearly. So it's not something to necessarily be over concerned with. It is something to be conscious of while you're working, however. And
yeah, absolutely.
You know, the other thing is, how thin or thick do you want your lines to be? What's going to show up in print the best? What's going to look good? You always want to be considering that stuff. And I think that, once more, what I've found, you can have thinner lines than you might initially assume.
Yes.
You can have very, very thin, elegant, subtle line work. And one of the places that I found that in was in the Spawn comic books, especially when Greg Capullo was working on those titles. Just such tiny little details, even around the outer contours of the characters, you know, the main outline of the elements within those panels. He would use a very thin contour that was very subtly weighted.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I've definitely seen a lot of that in the old Image comics.
Yeah, and hey, I think looking at work like that, studying it, analyzing it, trying to ask yourself questions such as, why have they taken this particular approach? What's making it work and the way in which it's working can really help you out with your own artwork. It can give you insight into the tricks of the trade. You know, what are these pros doing that make their art look so good, so appealing? And what can you take from it in order to gain the same effect within your own?
Yeah, absolutely, man. I've just noticed you've had, you know, sort of a fair bit of trouble with the rendering on this guy's face.
Yeah.
What do you think the main issue of it was?
So sometimes I'm just searching, and I think it's only because I work digitally that I'm afforded the luxury of being able to do that. I'm not always going to make the first decision, or rather, I'm not going to make the best decision the first time around. Usually, I've got to see how things look on the canvas first to figure out whether or not I'm going to keep it, or whether or not I'm going to toss it out. And it just so happens that with the character's face here, he's wearing this mask over the top of it, and it's a very thin layer of material. Because of that, some of the features, at least the primary forms of those features, are still visible through the surface of the material. And you do want to suggest them. You want to suggest those forms as the material stretches over the top of it to indicate that they are indeed there, to make it look as though there's a face underneath the mask.
Yeah, absolutely.
You could just leave it blank, but that wouldn't work. And if you don't shade those underlying forms accurately in a cool and interesting way, because I haven't just suggested that they're there.
Oh, yeah.
I've depicted them in a cool looking way. You know, I've gone for this almost skeletal appearance as I shade in the hatches around the cheekbones and really give them some depth.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do know this is a bit more of like a new technique to what you usually do, and this is sort of some of the stuff you've been trying out on the new Kozel pages or remasters. Yeah. So I'm guessing at this time you're probably getting used to the new technique. Or why this rendering style over the old one?
Well, this one's much faster. I find that there's a certain amount of freedom that I'm able to work within when I'm just throwing down these hatches. I'm not thinking. It seems like I'm overthinking it, because I'm constantly pulling out that eraser and having another crack at it. And It seems like I'm doing that a lot. But actually, that's a very fast process. I know this is sped up a little bit, but even real time, it was quite quick for me to throw this piece together. You know, throwing it together probably isn't the right terminology, because I did put a lot of love and effort and energy into making sure this piece was as good as it could possibly look. And I think that it was only able to arrive at that place, the epitome of what it could be, because I was a little bit more freer working on it. If I'm overthinking things, if I'm being a perfectionist, that's when I find that my artwork just loses the life force from it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so when I'm working quickly, there's a certain amount of energy behind the lines that I'm throwing down, of improvisation that I'm doing while I work. And that is very engaging for me as the artist, because it means that, you know, some things are just going to be unplanned. I don't know what I'm going to get. It's a box of chocolates, right? And so it's a surprise, not just for the client, not just for the audience that's ultimately going to experience the front of this book, but also for me.
Yeah,
it turns out oftentimes better than I could have ever imagined. And it's a little bit scary along the way. You know, I'm going into uncharted territory a lot of the time. Maybe this will work, maybe it won't. But I don't worry about that. I don't worry if it's going to work or not, because I know that I'm going to make it great. Like, by the time all is said and done, I would have made the right decisions I needed to make in order to get it to the place that it needs to be at. And so it really doesn't matter what obstacles or stumbling blocks, challenges I'll face along the way. I know that in the end, I can get it to the place that it needs to be at. And so you have a certain amount of faith within yourself, I think, when you get to a certain level and you look at the past works that you've created and you see what you're capable of.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I can see almost it's like you developed that just by cross-hatching it, and it looks so much more greater. And, you know, man, the immense, like, motivation you would have had to keep going with this, like, it's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
Like, how did you fight through that? Do you find trying the new stuff actually kept you motivated?
Yeah, it's like a puzzle. It's almost as if the more I failed, the more determined I became to solve the problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kind of like when you're playing a video game, you're trying to pass that level on Mario, but you keep on falling down the hole, or this plant keeps popping up and eating you. And it just makes you more determined to pass that level. Like, you go away from it for a while, frustrated. You're like, damn it. And the longer you're away from it, the more you want to go back and kick that level's ass. That's how I feel about my work when I'm facing these issues within it. Is that, you know, I can't leave it until that particular portion is solved. I don't get unmotivated. I get even more motivated to solve it. And it reminds me of the experience I was having last night on a new commission that I'm doing for a gentleman. It's a team-up cover. And the main character within the front it just had to be redone. The pose was off. The proportions weren't quite the way I wanted them to be. And because this character was sitting front and center, I had to make sure that it was 100% good to go before I went any further into the inks.
Absolutely.
And so I spent, an hour or two redrawing up that character, making sure the anatomy checked out, placing in the design elements of the costume over the top of that. And it was something that I had to do.
What was, like, when you get to that point to where, like, you realize you have to do his pose all over again, what is sort of like the language or the thoughts that go through your head that helped keep you motivated? Because I know sometimes when I have to do something like that, I can be pretty negative, and I'd probably have to go away and take a break.
Yeah.
But how did you get past that?
That's a really good question. I feel like a lot of people probably experience that very same thing. For me, I can tell you what was going through my mind. I said, this character is going to be a prominent focal point, which means I have to go back and redo it.
Yes.
And when I do go back and redo it, it's going to look awesome. This cover's going to look sick in the end. And I think that when you have those positive, reinforcing assurances in your mind, such as, hey, by the time all of this is done, that end result is going to look absolutely amazing, it pushes you forward so that even if you have to go back and redo something, spend that extra time that if you just got it right in the first place, you wouldn't have to spend. I feel like that's what is going to move you forward, get you back at the drawing board, and doing what it is you have to do to make sure that problem is resolved once and for all. Because you're still positive. You still know that it's going to be all good.
Yeah.
You just got to get past this little obstacle that's found itself before you.
Absolutely, man.
And also I go, hey, you know what? This is a lesson for me. I can learn something from this, so that the next time I face a similar problem, well, there's even less of a chance of it popping up in the first place, but when it does, I'll be able to resolve it quicker, I'll be able to see it faster. And I was also thinking about this. One of my favorite parts about comic book illustration is all of the little challenges that pop up.
Oh, yeah,
That's
absolutely.
actually what keeps it fun. This is still the phase of the drawing which keeps me hooked, and you can see that there's still things that I'm adjusting here, things that I'm rejigging. Again, I can't believe that I got this done in the amount of time that I got it done in, considering the amount of tweaking and rehashing that I did with these hatches. I have no idea, but I managed to do it somehow. But I'll tell you what my favorite part of the whole process is. It's the beginning stage when I am laying down the figure and I'm trying to get their position just right, and it's rough, and I'm erasing, I'm redoing, I'm erasing again, redoing, and I'm just trying to get it 100% right. I'm totally in my element because it's still a challenge. And if I was just able to lay it down and that was it, I would honestly get bored, because I don't have that much patience for the mundane anymore. I'm a little bit older now, and so things have to be not impossible to overcome at this point, but they still have to be somewhat of a challenge in order to keep me hooked in.
Absolutely, man. And just to talk a bit more about motivation.
Yeah.
Say you're like a beginning artist and you've just got a commission that isn't like the best pay rate, but you want to do it good still. How do you keep that motivation if you're really struggling for it?
Yeah.
Say you have to like go back on a piece like this, otherwise it won't look good, but the amount of money you're making isn't really worth it. All you have really is the fact that you want to make it good personally.
Absolutely, man. Look, I think that there's so many different ways you can answer that question. And I'm definitely not about to say, hey, if a client asks you to completely redo the cover because they've changed their mind and they're not willing to pay you, I'm not saying that you should accept that.
Yeah, absolutely.
You should definitely say, hey, look, I've sent you a number of works in progress. You saw how this cover was coming along. Now you're changing your mind. Once it's almost done, you're going to need to pay me some extra compensation.
How do you negotiate something like that professionally, though?
You would just say that straight out. You would just say, hey, listen, that's going to cost you a little bit more because I've already put in this amount of time. It's going to take this many more hours to redo that amount of work. So if you're okay with that, I'm okay to go ahead and redo something. If it's a small change, okay. If it's something which is actually changeable at the point at which you've arrived within the progression of the commission, okay, fair enough. You know, you want to make sure that your client is satisfied, that you've got a happy customer there. Because once this piece is complete, Michael Oden is going to go around, he's going to be sharing this cover.
Yeah.
He's going to be promoting his book with it. Other people are going to see it. So I want to do a good job for that reason also. He may very well recommend me to other people.
Yeah.
Okay,
absolutely.
so I'm putting myself out there on stage when I do this piece. It's not like it's just for him, it's going to hang on his wall in his private art gallery. No, this is going to be out in the public on the front of a book that's printed, that's published. So that's reason enough for me to go ahead and do the best job that I possibly can. The thing is about money is it's not as motivating as you think.
Yes, definitely.
After a while, the novelty of money wears off, and it actually wears off fairly quickly, not even after a while. It wears off quickly, within a matter of days, if not hours. You know, you get that commission, the payment gets sent through, and then you go, oh man, I actually have to do the work now. And there's just something for artists, especially, that money alone does not fulfill. What fulfills you as an artist is doing a good job, being proud of the work that you've done, knowing that the piece you just did is a little bit better than the piece you did previously, and that the work you do tomorrow is going to be on another level again. Because if you're able to keep on stepping it up in that way, you know that you're going to be in this constant evolution.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I see every piece I work on as a lesson. I see it as an opportunity to push myself that little bit harder to make it better than the previous work I've done. I know that it's going to be out there in front of everybody else. It's going to be sitting center stage, very likely, either within the interior of a book or on the front of a book, which is even more important.
Yeah.
And I know that it's going to, if I do a good job, it's going to increase my reputation. So there's many motivating factors for me to make sure I do a great job, other than just the money. And if the client tries to shorthand me or pull the wool over my eyes in some way, I'll probably still hand them the work. I just won't work for them again.
Yeah, dude, that's a great point, man.
Yeah.
And say reputation, right? How do you know when you get to a point to when you can charge more, or when you're under, like, say, maybe when you're going too cheap? Like, how do you really get in that headspace? Because, you know, sometimes I want a commission and I don't want to lose the commission because I'm charging too much. Yeah. But I don't want to take on the commission because it's just, I'm doing it for really cheap or something.
Yeah, it's tough, man. There's a lot to unpack there. Because when it comes to deciding on how much you're going to be paid as an artist, whether it's as a colorist, as an inker, as a penciler, whatever facet of comic book illustration you're being paid to execute, it comes down to two things. It comes down to three things, actually. How much you want to be paid, what level you're actually at, and how much budget the creator is willing to set aside for the job that they want you to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this all takes experimentation. Okay, and the way in which you experiment is you put yourself out there for an amount of money that is maybe even less than what you should be paid at the skill level you're at. And you know that at least if you can get a client willing enough to pay you that amount of money, that you can maybe step it up a little bit the next time around. And so what I did is, let's say, for example, you're doing a cover commission for $100 USD.
Yes.
And you know that you can get $100 USD. You've maybe had 1 or 2 clients pay you that amount of money. And this is just an example, by the way. Everybody's level of skill set is going to be different, and every client is different, every artist is different. But let's just say this as an example. You know that if you can get $100 USD, the next time somebody else asks you to do a commission, you can say, hey, I'm happy to do you this cover for $120 USD. See if you can get that just as an experiment. And if the client isn't really willing to pay you that much, say, listen, I really like the idea, I really like the project. If you need the work, then tell them you can do it for $100 USD. And maybe they're going to be a little bit more susceptible, but at least you know then that, oh, hey, I've settled on the correct price here. I am worth $100 USD at this point because that's what people are willing to pay me based on the quality that they're seeing in my work.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, if you keep on being paid what you're asked for every time you raise the price, then you can keep that going. You can keep that train chuffing until you get to a place where you start being denied. Now, the best position to be in, the only position you should ever be in, is a place of abundance. And by that, I mean it is the best place of negotiation that you could possibly be coming at a decision from. Right?
Yeah.
When it comes to working with clients. So if you're sitting in the boardroom and you're in a needy position, like you need the work, you'll be willing. Absolutely. Like that just steams off of you like a stench. And it's funny because not only will they not really want to work with you because of the neediness, because you'll be pushing for it, but they'll pay you a pittance because they know you're needy also.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? So they'll pay you nothing. They won't really want to work with you. Right? You will repulse them because neediness is a very unattractive, unlikable characteristic.
Sorry, how would you get out of something like that if you are in a struggling, needy space?
Yeah, I mean,
you need the money.
It's very dangerous to go into any negotiation being in that kind of state.
All right. So what would you recommend? Do you recommend they perhaps skill up before they start negotiating?
If you really need the money, then you're just going to have to take on that work, and you're going to have to take on whatever it is they're willing to pay you. You have no room to negotiate, right? Now let's take a look at if you're coming from a place of abundance. Let's say that you've got a number of money sources that you're making a living from. And that if you took any one of those money sources away, it wouldn't really matter because the rest would keep taking care of you. Maybe you've got some other job that pays enough and you're in a place where you don't really need to take on commissions.
Yeah.
But you can if you want to. If the project's interesting enough, if the characters are compelling and you're somewhat driven to draw them, like the last commission I did, I was illustrating 2 characters by the name of Perfect 10 and American Bliss, 2 characters that I actually wanted to illustrate. I had seen them before. They were kick-ass characters that had a great design, and I knew that I would have a great time just working on them. And so it was an absolute pleasure for me to snap up that commission. Awesome, great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sexy lady characters, what's not to love, especially when they've got a fantastic design. So if you're in a place where you don't need to take on commissions, but you can if you want to, then you can throw out a price, and it really doesn't matter what is said, what the person asking you to work for them has to say. If they say no, it doesn't matter. You win anyway, because you'll just keep doing what you're doing. You'll work on your stuff. Like for me, I'm working on Kozor, whether or not I take on more commissions or not, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So if someone says no, great, I get to work on more Kozor. If somebody says yes, awesome. I also get to do these cool commissions and work on Kozor.
It's a great point, man.
So when you're in a negotiation where you win either way, man, you've got a whole other persona that you're giving off.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the language you use, the things you say, the way you think, it's all completely different. It's a very stark contrast to how you come across when you're needy.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
So definitely try to get yourself in that place if you can. If you actually need the work, if you actually are, like, you can't pay the bills, you're struggling to eat, I would probably get into some of the career path other than comic book artist if you're in that position in life.
Fair enough.
You know, there's easier ways to make money than being a comic book artist. But look, here's the other thing, man. When you get your skill set to a certain place, people will just start hitting you up.
Yeah, man. I mean, that's great, and I have seen that happen. Another question I'm curious to ask is, what about when you get paid like a bucket load of money for, say, one piece? How do you, like, say, keep in a headspace where you keep it really quality? And how do you know, like, when it's, like, really worth it? Because I know if I got paid, per say, $5,000 on colors, I would be like, I wouldn't know what to think.
Dude, $5,000 on colors is, like, really crazy. I don't even know
crazy money
who you would be working for to get paid that much.
Just as an example.
As an example, yeah. Look, I think, man, the rule of thumb should be you should already be in that mindset already. Regardless of whether you're paid $50 USD per page for colors or $200 USD per page for colors, you should be doing your very best work either way. Yeah, because certainly. Why? It serves you as the artist, first and foremost. Yes, you're going to be producing a great product, but at the end of the day, if you start doing crappy work, which is completely dependent on the amount you're being paid, you know, your quality of work equals the amount of you're being paid, well, then all of a sudden you have no agency out of the level of quality that you can do. It's all dependent on the pay. So,
yeah.
And, you know, as I said before, let's say that you jump on board a project where you're being underpaid, but that project, it has your work within it, it's published, it's out there, it's in front of people. You want to make sure that your best work is being displayed in that product, even if you are underpaid to do it, just because you never know who's going to see it. We're judged based upon our worst work.
Yeah.
It's not our best work, man. That's why they say only put your best work in a portfolio, because the crappiest piece of art you have in that portfolio is going to be the piece that either gets you the job or doesn't get you the job, right? Because they're going to measure you against that. So always keep it in mind. And this goes out to anybody who is listening right now. Make sure that every piece, whether you're doing it for free, whether you're doing it for a high amount of money or a low amount of money, for yourself or for other people, do your very best work, because that trains your brain to make sure that you're producing nothing less than the full potential to which you are capable of when it comes to your art.
Absolutely. And I mean, probably to frame that question, that last one a bit more, what if it's like you're working for someone you know that's really big? Like, say it's a really big famous project. Like, how do you keep yourself from perhaps freaking out almost? You know, say it's like a big sort of a thing like that. That's sort of what I meant by, like, making big bucks.
I get you, man. I think, you know, you've got to understand that if you're being asked to work on that project, whoever has brought you on board realizes that you're at the level you need to be at and that you are ready to work on that project, which should serve as a bit of a confidence boost for you. They've seen what you can do. You're capable of doing that. Understand, resonate with the fact that you are capable of doing and executing at the standard that they believe you're capable of for that project.
Yeah, absolutely.
So as long as you know that, and look, sometimes you have to lie to yourself, man. This is one of the reasons as to why people end up getting success barriers and why they actually hold themselves back. It's not the man holding you down. It's not anyone out there that's already succeeding holding you back. Yes. A lot of the time it's us, because of the success barriers we put in place. And the reason that we put them in place is because we're afraid of the consequences of that higher level of success. Okay, so let's say that you're working on some dream project. Like for me, that would be The Darkness from Top Cow.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? What would that mean? It would mean, holy shit, I would actually have to get this work done to a deadline. That's one. I would have to make sure that it's the best work that I've ever done. That's two. I would have to impress, Mark Silvestri or whoever it was that was asking me to work.
Well, that's the other thing. Like, how do you know if you'd be overthinking work like that? Like,
yeah.
Because that would be something I'd definitely feel like I get stuck in.
That's the thing. Why do we overthink? We overthink out of insecurity. So what is the opposite that we have to be in order to not overthink? Well, we have to be confident. We have to know and understand that we've got the skill set needed in order to do what it is we're being hired to do. And
but you wouldn't want to be overconfident.
Well, it depends, man. Sometimes you have to be overconfident in order to jump into the pool you're about to go into. Because if you're always sitting on the sidelines because you're not confident enough, that's way worse than being overconfident. At least when you're overconfident, you're willing to do crazy shit.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, let the chips fall where they may after that, right? So being overconfident was what got me into a classroom, teaching in front of a full classroom full of students.
Yeah, that's a great point, man.
Yeah, so be a little bit overconfident. Lie to yourself. If you need to lie to yourself, if you're feeling unconfident and you need to be in a confident place to get the job done, then you better sit in front of the mirror for a while and tell yourself over and over again how much of a kick-ass artist you are. How much your shit rocks, right?
Have you ever gotten... Because this is probably one thing I fear the most, is you get into a situation where the client isn't happy and you really, fucked up the job and they probably don't want to work with you again. Has that ever happened to you, or is that just like a crazy fear dream or something?
No, man, that's never happened because I always make the fixes that the client asks of me.
Yes.
Again, there's certain motivating factors beyond just the money that push me to do that. So I usually always have a satisfied customer by the end. I want them to be satisfied. The worst feeling in the world for me is knowing that the client isn't happy with what they've purchased. That's horrible. Like that, I would rather give it to them for free and give their money back if they're unsatisfied with what I've given them. Yeah. So, but the only real problems that I don't ever think I've had a problem with a client, to be honest with you. I've had people who have requested work from me that were psychopaths, and I didn't end up working with them, thankfully.
Yeah.
But they when I say psychopath, they were actually crazy. So I mean, you've got to.
You couldn't trust them to work with.
Well, they were just nuts. Like, there was this one guy back when I was working in the video game industry, very notorious here in Melbourne, Australia, who had this, very shonky game studio. And basically what he would do is he would reach out to students who had just graduated from their games course, and he would offer them a job. But what he would do is request a test piece of art first and give you a brief. And if you were able to fulfill that brief, he promised that you would get a position at his company. And so what would end up happening is the test pieces would be done, but once they were handed in, he'd never get back to them. So he would just get free work all the time. And he had a reputation for doing this. Everybody knew about the guy. And so when he approached, and so when he approached me, I was at the time willing to work for pretty much anybody, but I knew what this dude was like. And so when he asked me to do a test piece, I said, look, you have seen my portfolio, you know the level of work that I can do. So if you actually want to work with me and we're going to make this happen, this is how much I charge, and, let me know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, I get a phone call from this guy, and he's going off his nut.
Jeez, man.
Yeah, he's completely unstable, and it just so happens that my phone ends up cutting out because the place in which I'm living at the time has very bad reception. So, it kind of is drawn back to that whole thing we were talking about with negotiation, big boss.
Absolutely.
Except my phone allowed me to do that for me. And so then I got an email from him, and it said something along the lines of, if I see you down the street, I'm going to beat your head in. Yeah, that's that level of psychopath.
Disgraceful. That's not an image you want to put out into the world.
No, and I know it's hard to imagine, but I actually got an email like that from a person who thankfully I didn't end up working with. But, it just goes to show that you'll get all different kinds of individuals out there. And I think that, once more, coming from a non-needy place allows you to be able to discern whether or not you want the job for the amount of pay that's being offered, and also whether or not you actually want to work with the client, because it's not just them choosing you. You've also got to choose them. If you've got a troublesome client that you don't get along with, that doesn't know how to communicate with you, that's just going to be way more trouble than it's worth, no matter what amount of money you're being paid.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I totally agree with that. And, because I know you often have lots of people emailing you. How do you get to that point where people are just wanting to offer you jobs? Man, that's crazy.
Yeah, it's really a fortunate place that I'm in. I think that you've got to develop a style within your art that is marketable within comic books, that people recognize as a high standard of comic book art. And there's a lot of different artistic styles you could go with out there. There's some very eccentric ones that you see in comic books these days, and they may work for certain titles, certain one-off issues, but ultimately it's the style that you might see within Jim Lee's work or Mark Silvestri's work, that very standard comic book style that people just love, like that they're drawn to. And when I say people, I'm talking about readers, people who actually buy the book, the end product. That's what clients are after, man. They want to get eyes on their product. They want people to jump onto it, and they want them to invest their money into what it is they're creating. And so it's your art that helps them to be able to do that, which means if you're going to be effective in doing so, you've got to develop your style in such a way that it has mass appeal. So for me, it just so happened that a lot of my influences fell within that realm. And because of that, my style leaned toward that direction.
Yeah.
And the rest is just honestly really, really hard work and dedication. I think that right now, I'm still very focused on rendering, making sure that my forms read correctly, that they're coming across in the right way, the right level of depth, the right level of height, the right shape.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the right material on top of them. And before that, if you're just starting out, you want to spend a good solid few years working on your foundations, making sure your proportions, your character movement, and your anatomy is all on point. If you're going to be working on your own books, it wouldn't hurt you to study up on character design a little bit. Line quality, execution, all of that stuff comes into play. And at some point, once you've assimilated it into your experience, on a high enough level, on a certain amount of regularity, then you will find that you start putting out work, people start coming to you. And one of the best ways, I got this question the other day, how do you get people jumping on board and following you on social media?
Yeah, absolutely.
How do you get your work out there in front of people? And I asked this question to a guy that some might know called Boss Logic. Code is his name. And he said to me that it all just comes down to fan work, fan art, man. Like, fan art is just, in reality, more searchable than original characters.
Absolutely. Would you recommend doing fan art for a project that you wanted to work on? Or do you think that would maybe put the client off?
No, for sure. I've worked on a number of Phantom comic book covers, and the only way in which I got that commission was because I put out a fan art of the Phantom.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, they came across that on Google. They emailed me, they hit me up. They said, hey, we really like this piece. Would you be able to do us up some covers?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that's a perfect example as to why, the reasoning behind why you might want to do fan art and how it could be valuable to you. But other than that, how many times a day do people Google search Superman or Batman or Spawn? Spawn movie is a very popular search term right now. You know, it's in the news a lot.
Yeah.
You could add tags to your Spider-Man piece, like Spider-Man movie, Marvel, Disney, whatever. Again, all searchable terms. Add that to the little description you place underneath the artwork in your blog post, and people are going to come searching for you. They will just accidentally see your stuff. And how cool is that?
Yeah, man, that's great. That's great advice.
Yeah. And they're going to give you feedback, comments. If you join a community like the How to Draw Comics community on Facebook, which is an offshoot from our main site, howtodrawcomics.net,
Yes.
that community is specifically designed for you to be able to post your work and get feedback by a large amount of individuals who are going to tell you their thoughts, especially when you ask for that feedback. It's a very large group now.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary group. I think it's one of the top ones on Facebook, so I definitely recommend being part of it.
Hell yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, man. And, dude, this piece here is turning out so well. Like, you can see that you going back and forth on that rendering, really, it did just work out in the end.
Yeah.
How did you know when you had gotten to that point where you're happy with the rendering?
Yeah.
And then you move on to another bit?
Yeah, that's another great question. I think there's a certain amount that can be said for technique and execution and all that other stuff. But what you also have to develop as an artist is your eye. You've got to be able to discern what looks good and what doesn't look good.
Absolutely.
And I think that that's how I decided upon the rendering that I had eventually established on the face to describe the features underneath the mask. I also went back and redid the hair a little bit, re-rendered that out here and there just to make sure the overall form, the overall style of it was coming across correctly. And so I wouldn't be able to do that if I was an artist of less experience. So I really think the only way to develop your eye is to work long and hard enough to be able to train it. And the way in which you train it is you read other comic books, you look at your influences, you really ask yourself what makes their artwork so good, what makes it so appealing, as I've already mentioned.
Absolutely.
And by analyzing their work, you, in your mind, catalog and store away those attributes that make it look good.
Yeah, like I mean, people often mention like a visual library
Yeah.
that you keep, and I've even noticed that in my own work, where it's like I'll ask myself, why am I cross-hatching this way? And it's just because I've built it that way,
Totally, man. Well, also, you want to be contrasting and comparing your work to those of your influencers and looking at the differences between the two. Going, hey, what does theirs have that mine doesn't have?
Yeah, absolutely.
Why does theirs look good and why does mine not look good? What could I take from theirs, add into mine that would level it up? It's all about stealing, man. Like, you don't want to steal it at face value. You don't want to create a carbon copy of what they've already created, but you certainly want to learn as much as you can from them. Their technique isn't copyrighted. No one has copyrighted cross-hatching.
Yeah, absolutely.
So many artists that cross-hatch exactly like David Finch cross-hatches.
Well, sometimes, like, I've seen people look down upon that, where they'll look down upon you for looking too much like David Finch per se. What do you think about that? What's your opinion?
Yeah, I think that those people are definitely entitled to their opinions. In the end, what that opinion is worth to some other individual artist is up for question. We've all got different opinions when it comes to art because art is very subjective. And because of that very reason, there's no right or wrong way of approaching it. Some people say, oh, you should never have to erase.
I erase all the time.
I've erased it 1 billion times throughout this demonstration, as you've seen and the good people watching have also witnessed. So, in the end, what's your philosophy as an artist? What do you believe in? I believe it doesn't matter how I get there as long as I end up with an awesome looking product by the time I'm done.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'll do what's necessary. I'll sacrifice myself. If I need to erase, if I need to redo large portions of it to get to that point, I will. But I won't hold myself to some strange way of working, some weird belief system that forces me to keep what I've got there on the page, as an example, and never erase, never tweak it, never try to make it as good as it can be.
Yeah, absolutely. And just speaking on that philosophy point, how do you develop something like that, like your own philosophy, and, sort of just not feel like you're full of shit in a way?
Yeah, I know, right?
You're not delusional or anything.
When you read self-help books or watch self-help seminars, they'll get you to write down, okay, what are your core beliefs? And it's like, I don't know, like, I believe in goodness and doing right by others. Like,
I mean, I guess, like, the confidence to, sort of teach other people how to draw and feel like you know which style is best.
Yeah, I would say it's less a belief and more of an interest. Like, what am I interested in? I'm interested in creating kick-ass artwork. I'm interested in teaching other people because I feel like, there's never anything that we do that doesn't have some sort of payoff, at least something that we do repeatedly. And for me, the reason I teach, the reason why I've got a website like howtodrawcomics.net, which is 90% free, is because every time I do a tutorial, every time I do a video like this and I analyze it with you, like we're doing here, I learn something about myself.
Yeah, absolutely.
I solidify the way in which I work by going back and rewatching it and asking myself these critical questions. So, I think that if somebody has that belief, as an example once more, that, they should never erase, maybe their motivation for that is because they want to get to a place where they just make the right decision each time, every time, without ever needing to erase. And maybe they believe that they're training themselves up to be able to accomplish that by not erasing now.
Yeah, absolutely, man.
So,
it's great points.
So I think that's how you structure a belief system. But my fundamental belief system is I just want to create something that looks kick-ass. I want to create the same kind of work that
Absolutely.
I see those I look up to and admire creating.
Me and you both, man. I totally agree with that. And I know we might be ending up soon, but another quick question was, how do you specifically take in information? Like, say, when you watching a tutorial and you've got to like break down like what's the information you want to take in and what's the information that's not as beneficial.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to watch someone and then take in the wrong information and end up worse.
For sure. Yeah, and that's even harder to answer because we don't always click with every instructor. Sometimes, whether you're learning from us or whether you're learning
absolutely.
from Proco or Robert Marzullo or whoever, right? They might say something in just a slightly different way that really clicks with the individual.
Yeah, absolutely.
And vice versa. Maybe it's just my particular way of putting things that cause some students to really comprehend what it is I'm telling them, as opposed to other teachers. So that's one thing. And there's no wrong way of working. I think that you can learn bad habits as an artist that cause you to have a more difficult time making progress than needed. But I honestly believe that if you go for those proven instructional books or instructional courses that have great reviews, that are notorious for helping other people, then you're going to be good to go. So, as an example, everybody knows who Andrew Loomis is.
Oh, yeah.
He's
absolutely.
famous. His books make sense.
It's usually the number one recommendation I get.
Exactly.
As soon as I search for stuff like that.
And what other recommendations do you get? How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way, Bern Hogarth, and what's the other dude that David Finch is always referencing? George Bridgman,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
So all of these books come highly recommended. You can look at the reviews, people rave on about them. So you probably know that they're good. Now, yes, there's tons and tons of courses out there on Udemy, on howtodrawcomics.net, which actually works through Gumroad. So there's reviews left on there as well, which you can check out.
Yeah.
You look at those reviews, you look at what other people are saying, how the students are affected. On Skillshare, what's really cool is on my How to Design a Character course, The Making of E, a lot of the students are starting projects where they post up the characters they've made from watching that course. So not only do other students who are thinking about taking the course get to see their reviews, they actually get to see the finished result, the benefit of having done it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Before they ever jump into it. So I think that can be really valuable. So the other way in which I judge whether or not I'm going to enroll in a course or learn a particular habit from a certain instructor is if I look at their work and I like the kind of work that they do and I would like to be able to do similar work, hell yeah, bring it on. I want that instructor to teach me how they do what it is they do. When I first discovered that there was a course out there which allowed me, I believe it was by Brian Habelin, to be able to color the Spawn way.
Yeah.
No hesitation. I bought that course, baby, because I want to know how to color the Spawn way. I don't care what I have to go through, what the technique is. If it's teaching me wrong, as long as it leads me to a point where I'm able to color the Spawn way, I don't care.
Yeah, absolutely, man.
So
That's a great point.
I would choose your instructors in that manner.
Yeah, and just another quick note. Say you're looking at speed paintings and things like that. Are those worth it to learn from? To perhaps copy or check the technique? Like, how would you learn perhaps from a video like this if you're watching it without sound?
If I was Oh, you mean like a speed drawing like this?
Yeah, like a speed drawing. Like, how would you analyze it and try to learn from it in your own head?
Yeah, like a time-lapsed art demo such as this one. What you get to see is the process unfolding before your eyes.
Yeah.
That's the value you get out of it. You get to see how a piece is done from start to finish. Yes, it's sped up, but you can see that the individual steps that I'm taking here in order to complete this piece, there's only a few of them. When I lay down a hatch, I lay down a hatch in very much the same way I laid down the previous hatch. So all of those hatches there, you've seen them probably laid down onto the page hundreds of times by the time this piece is done, as sped up as it is, and they're laid down in the exact same way. So you're observing that. Yes, you're not necessarily seeing them laid down real time, but you still have a very solid idea as to how it's done.
Yeah, and just for my the practical side, say I want lines exactly like the way you're doing them right now. Would you recommend to someone open up a Clip Studio Paint file and just render out their own hair shape or something, and just look closely at what you are doing and try to emulate that?
Yeah, for sure. And we didn't really get into hair here, but I sort of explained it in the previous demonstration video that we put up last week. I'd say things like you break up the hair first, you divide it up. In this case, I actually dropped in the shadows in order to get the main values of the overall form reading correctly.
Yeah.
Then I started adding in the details. So when you're explaining what's happening within the process, again, it doesn't matter so much if it's sped up. And in fact, I learned everything I know from David Finch's tutorial videos on the Gnome One workshop.
Absolutely.
And they were sped up. And I still got it. I remember at the time it didn't even occur to me that this wasn't real time. It didn't matter. That really is quite meaningless. What matters is the explanation. What matters is being able to clearly see the process unfold. And I think that's why you can't underestimate the value of a time-lapse demonstration such as this. Yes, it's free, but don't let that stop you from really sitting here, analyzing and taking in what's being shown. Try to redo this piece in your own time. Lay it down one hatch after the other and try to get something similar to what you see here. You'll learn so much from doing that.
Yeah, do you think people could actually get to a point where they can emulate how you're placing in those crosshatches just by looking at this?
Yeah, for sure. People have done it on my drawing demonstrations before. One of the earliest videos I uploaded here to the How to Draw Comics channel was the Harley Quinn series.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there was a particular individual who had sent me some of the work that they did from watching that video, and it was a carbon copy, sure, but because I went into so much depth on exactly how every single step was executed, they were able to successfully recreate that image using the same techniques. And once you've done that, you can take those techniques, now that you've taken them for a test drive, and you can go anywhere you want. You don't have to stick to the course anymore. You can go way out into the wild, take them wherever you want, apply them to any idea, your own ideas.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that pretty much brings us to the end of today's comic art demonstration. I hope that everyone out there listening got a ton of value out of what you've seen here today.
Man. Well, I've gotten a ton of value for myself.
Yes.
Just asking questions. I mean, I really like these videos, and I hope we keep on doing more of them.
We should do more of them, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, let's see what the viewers think. Please, everybody watching, leave your comments in the description below. Let us know whether or not you would like to see more of these comic art demonstrations. I think we make a good team.
Yeah.
We bounce a lot off of one another, and I love the questions you ask. These are questions that I don't think of myself.
And, probably to your viewers next time, if they do leave questions in the comments, I'd be happy to take some of them and ask them to you for those commenters.
Yeah,
so,
for sure.
That'd be great.
That sounds awesome, and I think that's a wonderful idea. Remember that if you'd like to see more videos just like this one, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell for notifications, and if you'd like more comic art tips, tricks, and tutorials, I'd also highly suggest checking out the howtodrawcomics.net site. We've got a link to that down in the description below, but what you'll find there is a bunch of written tutorials. We've just uploaded a brand new tutorial that focuses on drawing the back of the human torso by the exceptionally talented and very informative Joe Catapano. We've also got a number of video tutorials which are very similar to the ones you see here on the channel. We've got a podcast where we interview a bunch of different artists from the field of comic book illustration and from other fields too, video games. You know, we interviewed Mark Brunet one time, one of the best interviews I ever had. Ex-art head at Blizzard Entertainment, creator of QBrush. Amazing dude.
It's amazing, man.
Yeah, really cool. And we've also got our premium section, the How to Draw Comics course store, where when you're ready to take your comic art skill set to the next level, there's a bunch of instructors who I've personally reached out to, asked them to put their courses on the site. And I'm talking about the likes of David Finch, Trent Kanuga, Robert Marzullo.
Oh, dude, speaking on that, like, I know someone personally who done David Finch's new courses, and I gotta say, it looks almost better than his work sometimes. So if it was me, I'm even thinking about it right now. Probably subscribe to that David Finch course if you want to be really good.
Well, hell yeah, and it's not even a subscription, man, it's a one-off payment. So you can pay for it outright, you'll get all the pearls of wisdom David, with all of his years of experience in the mainstream industry, has to give you. So definitely worth the buy. Again, I learned so much from him, and it's an absolute pleasure, honor to be able to showcase his courses on the How to Draw Comics store. I've also got a number of courses. The one I would recommend, actually the two I would recommend that I have put up there that are the most valuable are by far the Proportions course, a big hit with everybody,
Absolutely.
and also the How to Create a Superheroines course. Because, man, that whole thing was scripted, word for word. I put a lot of time, a lot of thought into exactly how I was going to explain everything that's demonstrated.
And that's a great course. I mean, I've got a copy of it. I regularly actually just use the templates that you do for reference.
Nice, man.
You know, it's great value in that course, so I definitely recommend it as well.
Hell yeah, man! It's one of my favorites, and it's one that I'm still so proud of till this day. No regrets. Sometimes I look back at a course, I'm like, man, I hate it. It could have been done so much better, but that one, no way. It was the best.
Yeah.
You know, again, browse through the store. There's lots and lots of great courses there. I could give you tons of recommendations, but every course that's there, if it's there, you're going to get something out of it. Other than that, check out our website, buttonbrostudios.com, for our comic book news and comic book updates. Usually I'm posting artworks such as the one you just saw demonstrated in this video, commissions that the Barton Bros do together. We've got our comic book Kozel featured on there, which, mentioning that, once more, check out the link in the description below for Kozel Descent into Madness. It'll take you directly to the Indiegogo campaign where you can back the book, and if you're unsure, look through the preview pages we've uploaded, because it'll give you a very small but potent taste as to what you can expect within the full book. We're taking our time with this. We're going through each and every page that Korey has done, and I'm remastering it. In some cases, I'm redrawing entire panels, inking them up, rendering them to the hilt.
Yeah, man, you're doing great work on it. Like, I'm so excited to get my own copy of the book. So.
Thanks, bro. I appreciate that. I'm glad that you like the work that I'm doing. And Korey is adding in brand new pages. In fact, the latest page that he's just done up for this book blew my mind. I can hardly believe that this is actually going to be the caliber of art we'll be holding in our hands once it goes to print. So, very exciting times. Make sure that you're a part of it. We want you to have this book in your hands. So, back it today on Indiegogo. Until next time, keep on creating, keep on drawing, and we'll see you in the next comic art tutorial. Bye bye for now.
Absolutely. See you later.